How you doing?
Hey, good. How are you?
Doing well. Hear me okay?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Good job.
Okay. So today on Call Out, we're going to be debating social. A couple points.
All right.
It's up
Sorry,
to
you cut out. You cut out there at the end. You said we're going to be debating social, and then I lost the rest.
Oh, sorry. We will be debating socialism today. My side is that socialism doesn't work. My opponent's side is that socialism does work. And I was just asking if you wanted me to start my points, or do you want to start your points?
I'm good either way. I guess I want to make sure we have a good standard by which we can judge does or doesn't work. So, do you have an idea of what you mean while you say socialism doesn't work? I mean, it seems very obvious that socialism does work, considering we have socialist countries that exist in the world, right? So we have socialist countries that exist and have existed for a long time. So I would say socialism does work, and we have numerous socialist programs throughout the United States, throughout many other countries. All these programs work to some varying degree of success. So, I mean, clearly socialism does work. So when you say socialism doesn't work, do you mean something more than at face value?
Sure. So they brag about democratic socialism, which is a nice way of saying communism, and then there's national socialism, which is a form of which is Nazism essentially. So it's pretty much, I think that of socialism as theft in a sense. That's why I don't subscribe to the idea of it. It is an idea that sounds good on paper, but as far as execution goes, I don't think it's very well. So I just wanted to read the definition of socialism according to Merriam-Webster. Any of various economic and political theories advocating for collective or governmental ownership administration of the means of production, distribution of goods. So it's the government controlling most or everything. That's not a good thing, because I'm a limited government kind of guy. So I guess that's why I have an issue with it. But go on.
Okay, I mean, definitely, if you're a limited government kind of guy, then socialism is not going to be for you, right? That's pretty straightforward. I would say that socialism, though, even for someone that's a limited government, you accept that there's some things that need to be socialized, right? Some things, including like the road system, the healthcare system, the police, the fire department, the education. Pardon?
Armed forces.
Armed forces, the education system. I mean, there's certain things. Just giving, just in America, which we're clearly not a socialist country. Those socialist programs exist, and if you believe that, I mean, the armed forces is an excellent example. If you believe that your country should be defended by an armed forces, then you believe that socialism does work in some aspect, right? I mean, you don't think that you should be responsible for recruiting or keeping a standing military or being part of a standing military to fight international wars or to defend yourself from an international threat. I mean, you recognize that if somebody attacks New York City or California or Florida, I don't know where you live, but if someone attacks somebody on the other side of the country, that's from you, that doesn't necessarily personally direct it, but you realize that if that were to happen, it would impact you because we're connected as a society. It would impact you in a significant way. So you recognize that we should combine all the resources that it takes in order to provide for a national defense, because we're all interconnected, right? So that's the idea, I think, behind socialism, is that everyone is connected, and what happens to one person impacts, at least to some degree, what happens to another person across the entire country. So you're willing to put a little bit of what you make, or a little bit of what you have, or a little bit of your time, or whatever you're paying forward into the collective pot in order to use that in order to defend the the society. I mean, that's just a socialist principle, and there's only one institution that can govern that, and that's our national government. You wouldn't have a Tennessee government or a local government, or even a collection of local governments managing our national defense, right? It would have to be a national government.
And I'm not an anarchist by any means. I'm not saying go
Okay.
anything and get rid of the government. I
Okay.
think government does have a purpose.
Okay. All right.
But I've read certain reports like for example, Venezuela. The monthly minimum wage falls to under $1 a month. Stuff like that. And they have total economic and humanitarian crisis under their hands. According to the website Dollar Today, which tracks the real value of Venezuela bolivar against the U.S. dollar, the minimum wage of 248,000 bolivares is now worth just 95 cents. So that's equivalent to a shocking 59 cents an hour. However, all minimum wage hikes naturally lead to increased rates of inflation, meaning they lower the value of people's monthly income as the currency is rendered practically worthless. So, I mean, there's just certain aspects of socialism I've seen in other countries that show that it doesn't work. It says also here in the article, Venezuela's economic problems also extend beyond hyperinflation, having defaulted on their $200 billion worth of debt owed mainly to China and Russia, while also contending with economic sanctions imposed by the United States and the European Union in response to growing levels of human rights violations and a rapid descent into socialist dictatorship. I was also reading in other articles that they were scouring through garbage and stuff. But people try to think of well, what about Europe as this utopia? But I don't think that that's the case. I mean, I think that most forms of socialism, or too much socialism, is a very bad thing.
Okay, but we have to be careful. We can't say that because a country is socialist that it leads them to things like hyperinflation. I mean, we have Greece as an example of a country that was subject to what happens when you have hyperinflation. They end up defaulting on some of their debt, their currency value dropped. So, I mean, that's not limited to socialist. So to say that a country's economy can fail because it's socialist, I mean, you can have a country's economy fails for numerous reasons. I mean, imposing harsh sanctions are going to make it difficult for a country to survive. And you mentioned that there were sanctions on Venezuela from the United States, and then they were in a lot of debt from China and Russia. So there's plenty of other things that say that that could have led to that besides socialism. And I would think to counter that, I would have to introduce examples of socialist countries where that's doing well. I mean, first we have China, of course, is a superpower, so we can just accept that socialism is working there. We have Denmark that has wide-ranging social welfare. You have Finland. I'm looking here at a list. Canada, Sweden, Ireland, New Zealand. I mean, there's tons of countries that, if they're not strictly politically socialist, they have widely implemented socialist plans. Education is free. College education is free. Everyone that goes to school gets a free meal. They have universal health care. There's tons of socialist programs within these countries that make them, yes, maybe they have, some of these countries have higher taxes, but when you're looking at what they have, and that every child, no matter rich or poor, has wonderful opportunities. It seems to me that whatever we might be losing, or whatever someone might claim that we'd be losing from by going to a socialist state, or whatever freedoms they might be giving up, they're getting much more in return, right?
Well, Not necessarily. I think that it's kind of having the government spoon feed you and wipe your ass for you, and I don't like that idea. I kind of want my own personal responsibility and independent freedom to do what I want and have limited government. Um, the Mark Perry is reporting that about how socialism is the big lie of the 20th century. While it promises prosperity, equality, and security, it delivers poverty, misery, and tyranny. Equality was achieved only in the sense that everyone was equal in his or her own misery. In the same way that a Ponzi scheme or a chain letter initially succeeds but eventually collapses, socialism may show early signs of success, but any accomplishments quickly fade as the fundamental deficiencies of central planning emerge. And to interject just one more thing before I let you speak. Um, the the crazy thing is that, or sorry, the thing that you left out when you were talking about this was the migrant crisis. I mean, there's also high taxes. There's an immigration problem in Europe. Europe is facing all sorts of issues right now, and I feel that high taxes can lead to, a crashed economy, or it could lead to, like you said, hyperinflation earlier. So I'm gonna let you speak a little bit.
Okay, I don't think it's necessarily true that central planning of governments leads to their downfall. I mean, I think it's most certainly could be true that a government could badly manage the resources of a country, right? But I mean, that's could equally happen under any sort of economic policy. I mean, we know that with capitalism, there's a guaranteed portion of the population that will be in poverty, that will be below the mean, right? That there will be a minimum. There's no minimum in a capitalist system because it's going to be it's going to be scalar. So you're going to have the very rich and you're going to have the very poor in a capitalist society. And so that's just necessarily how it's going to be. When socialism comes in, is saying, yes, it's going to be true that under a socialist policy that you're not going to have the very rich, that because the government controls the means of production, they're not going to allow individuals to manipulate those means to make a huge amount of money. But you lose those individuals that become ultra rich. But you also lose those individuals that become poor, and they gain. So you have a minimum education, a minimum education level, minimum wage level, a minimum lifestyle level. So, especially in an idealized socialized country, but even in practice, I mean, any number of these countries that I mentioned before that have socialized education. That they have 100% literacy rate. That means every person in their country reads. The United States doesn't have a 100% literacy rate, even though we do have a socialized education system, because we only do things part way because of all the pushback that we get. Because if you do any sort of socialist programs, there's always people saying that there's too much. If we do welfare, people are always pushing back against it. I mean, so it's difficult, and what we have is a quasi-socialist state, or where we have quasi-socialist programs where if we had fully implemented them, we wouldn't have the things that the quote was talking about. I mean, poor implementation of any economic system is most certainly going to lead to a poor economy, but it's not necessarily the case that a government will handle an economy poorly. And especially I would say, given modern technology, building on our past experiences, modern understanding of what the economy needs, we could definitely provide, and socialism would be a better solution to at least the United States problem. I mean, capitalism is obviously failing, right? At least failing certain aspects of our community. There are definitely people in our community that are being failed by capitalism.
Well, I think you're referring to crony capitalism, but there's certain implementations of capitalism that don't work. That I agree with. However, there's many issues I see with socialism. The fact that it's somehow the rich's fault for everything, and somehow they need to be taxed more. I just see that as insane a little bit. There
Well, I
should.
don't think.
Okay.
Well, I don't think that that's the viewpoint that socialism had, that the rich should be taxed. Now, in a socialist economy, you wouldn't have the ultra rich, right? You would have people that are, of course, more wealthy, and you would have people that are less wealthy, but you wouldn't have such wide gaps, right? Because you would have everyone would be up at a minimum level, and then you would have people down from the lofty levels that we have, where we wouldn't have somebody like the president of Amazon who makes, $26,000 a second or whatever it was that he made the first half of this year. I mean, that's obscene. That wouldn't happen in a socialist economy, because for the means of production for all that would be controlled by the state. So every person would have a job. Every person would have the food they need. Every person would have the housing. I mean, it's basically, if you think of just the needs that an individual has: food, housing, education, security. Socialism provides, or can provide, security for those individuals in a way that capitalism can't. And I understand the idea about it's good to, to struggle for these things, or that it's good to be able to have some say on whether or not you fail or whether or not you survive. But you're looking at it from an individualistic point of view. A socialist country or socialist government is not an individualistic government, right? They don't think about, this person is better for this person to struggle and fail than it is for this person to not have to struggle. The way they think of it more as, this individual is part of our community. This individual is part of the country. We know that his minimum basic needs, what he needs, is food, shelter, education. So they say, we're going to give this to him, right? Now, in exchange for giving this to him, he's going to do his part, and he's going to be given a certain job or being able to do a certain function, whatever his ability is. And the person and the individual is not like where we in America would think, oh, they're forcing me into a job. We have a completely different mentality here that wouldn't necessarily work under social. We would think the government is forcing me in to do this particular job, or forcing me in to do something that I'm not wanting to do. I have a right to my own self, so therefore I don't want to do this, right?
Right.
And under socialism, if you adopt the socialist mentality, they're saying, I get these things. I want to do my part to give back to my community so that everyone else can have what they have, that we can have my children can have what they have, so that the way of life can continue on. So socialism is not a selfish system. And of course, it's not where capitalism is inherently selfish, right? We have to agree that capitalism, at least in its broadest sense, are individuals try to make as much money as they can by doing things as cheaply as possible and selling them, right? It's a buy and sell. Socialism is different. They're wanting to just bring their population up to a minimum level. And I mean, no one thinks that they want to live. No one expects that they're going to live extravagantly, but they're not going to have to worry about where their next meal is coming in. So once you have people that are satisfied that if you have all their needs met, they become more productive. I mean, we know that in experience, that if you pay workers more, they become more productive. If they don't have to worry about certain things, they become more productive. We know that through capitalism, right? So this also applies in socialism. People that are happier and not worried about what they're going to have to do, or where their next meal is coming from, or knowing that there's going to be something for their children later on already, are going to work harder. That's going to be more fruitful. I mean, socialism works simply because everyone is no longer as selfish. That would be my goal, is once you know that people are giving of themselves so that you can survive, you're more willing to give of yourself. So it just becomes a change in just the way of thinking.
I still just don't like the idea of the government giving me free stuff. I mean, the capitalism itself is a good ideology. It's crony capitalism that turns into the whole bureaucracy, with money and politics, and corruption in Wall Street that led to the 2008 financial crisis, stuff like that. So, but at the same time, socialism is it just I don't understand why the government has to give us free stuff. Why we can't keep more of our own hard-earned money, with tax cuts and stuff like that, because socialism
Again,
is,
this is
they
a.
want higher taxes, higher regulations, all that stuff.
I think this is. I guess I think I get what you're saying though. When you make an X number, say you make $1,000, you don't want to give $500 back to the government, right? You would
Yeah.
want to ideally keep all $1,000, but you know that you can't do that. You know that there are certain programs that you need to help fund. So I think the change is when it comes to which programs do you think you don't need to fund, right? I guess the problem is that you feel that the government takes some money from you for programs that benefit other people that you wish you didn't have to. So you've said a couple times that you don't think the government should give people free stuff, but you understand, like under a socialist system, that you wouldn't be getting free stuff, right? The stuff that you get from the government is because that you're contributing, right? Everyone contributes, everyone gives what they can, or everyone does what they can, everyone gets what they need, right? So that's the idea. So that's not an idea that anybody really, I think, would disagree with, right? If you give what you're able to give and you get what you need, that seems pretty straightforward. All small communities work that way. When you get to larger communities, when you start adding in different levels of interactions, then it gets a little more complicated. But to me, it seems like when you're talking about where's the cutoff, right? If you're saying, if I give $100 in right now so that to make healthcare free for everyone, you're giving that $100 in order to make healthcare free for yourself as well. So everything that you're giving in this benefits yourself as well, right?
Okay.
I mean, people argue. I mean, it's hard for somebody like you. I mean, you look pretty healthy, so you probably don't go to the doctor. So it doesn't make sense. Why am I giving, X number of dollars and every month for me to go to the hospital or never go to the hospital, spend 30 years or 25 years and never have gone to the hospital, never had a broken bone or anything. So why should I be paying for all these other people who don't take care of themselves, who have bad health habits? Why should I be paying for them? I mean, that's an entirely valid viewpoint until the time comes in when if you happen to not have adequate insurance and you get in a car wreck, and then now you're having to do reconstructive surgery on half your body, right? Or so what happens in the United States is that individuals are put in desperate situations because of injuries and stuff like that, because we don't have a true socialist medicine, right? If you have good insurance, that's good. If you don't have good insurance, but you make too much money to qualify for the social programs that we have, you could end up owing huge amounts of debt and making it almost impossible for you to ever get out of that kind of debt, depending on your injury. So these things happen, but they wouldn't happen in a socialist system. So is it worth risking that to keep that extra $100 a month or whatever that percentage is a month? I mean, obviously in America, people argue that it is. I don't know necessarily that it is.
I just don't believe the whole free healthcare for all sort of thing. If you're talking about making healthcare cheaper for people, yeah, I'm all for that. But I mean, free, I mean, that would cost a buttload of money, and I'm already been taxed. I don't mind getting $100 or $200 exempt for my taxes, usually on my paycheck. So I mean, that does happen. So like that. So I mean, I just don't believe that we should just give free stuff to a bunch of people, and I just think that it leads to higher taxes and higher regulations, and just you have the government controlling
Well,
your life.
I mean, it's definitely true with socialism that you have higher taxes and you have higher regulation, right? That's true. I mean, the way I mean, I don't know if you would necessarily call it regulation if the government controls the entire means of production, which as it would in a true socialistic uh, country, or I don't know if there would be regulation. It would just be how the government does things. But a regulation is for private individuals functioning within a government. They have certain regulations that come on. So, but in the same sense, they are going to be more strict regulations. But the government is also going to try to do things as cheaply as possible while still maintaining a level of quality, right? So overall production is going to become more efficient because the government will spend time investing in government. So when you're talking about, I keep hearing you say, I don't want to give up more of my stuff for other people to get stuff for free, right? That's like that seems to be the bread of your issue. But I think, can you see, like in a socialist society, people wouldn't be getting things for free. Like you can't think about getting things for free in a socialist society. Basically, the government and the country is composed of the people, right? And the people have come together and they said that we're going to make sure that everyone gets this certain level, whatever we have to do, wherever we have to pull the resources from. And yes, it's going to be usually from the richer side to bring it down to the bottom, because I mean, where else are you going to get the excess from than at the top to bring it down to the bottom? But you're going to say that we're going to bring everyone up. So it's not that anyone is getting something for free, because it's just, this is what to be a member of our society means that you get this standard of living. That is, it's not someone is getting something extra. So when you say someone gets something for free, it implies that another individual doesn't get it or has to pay for it, right? So in a socialist situation, that doesn't exist. Like, you wouldn't say, I have to pay for my health care, but this individual gets their health care for free. There's no dichotomy. There's no difference there. You would say, I have access to universal health care in the socialist society. This person over here has access to universal health care. So everyone has equal access to the same thing. So it's not like you're having to pay for something that someone else is getting. Everyone already has access to it. If you're working more, you're capable of producing more, and you're putting more into the system, then yes, you're going to be putting more than an individual who can't work. But when it comes to the point that you can't work, or something happens that you're unable to work, or you're unable to work at the same level where you were working before, you're not going to lose your access. So here in our capitalist system, if you're producing and you're making you have a certain job and you're making a certain income level and you have a certain lifestyle, right? You can go from having a certain lifestyle to living on the streets, right? You can do that just from losing your job. Something like that doesn't happen in a socialist country. Someone who can go from being on the high end of the socialist scale, to be one of the richer members of socialists, because you will have them. I mean, you're going to have scale in every system. It's not like everyone's going to make exactly the same amount of money for doing different degrees of work. So even in socialism, you're going to have different scales. But if something happens for you at your upper end, you can only fall so far, right? You can only fall far enough to still meet the minimum standard. So you're never going to be without food. You're never going to be without shelter. You're never going to be without education. You're never going to be without health care. So it just seems like an idealized system for a government that cares about making sure all their people are taken care of. And if you do, I forget what the test is, but if you do an idea where you don't know what part of society you're going to end up in, it seems like the socialist society is going to be the one that's going to be the safest bet for everyone, right?
Probably not. I think that the struggle in a capitalist society is better than a struggle in a socialist society. So you got to take into account the job numbers, the people with homes, the people without homes, socialist versus capitalist society. I kind of see the socialism as this like magical utopia, which it really isn't. the dystopian wasteland.
Well, I don't think it's either one of those, right? I know it's definitely can be considered if you think, oh, everybody works, but they only work as much as they need to in order to make everything, so everyone has this wonderful life. I mean, that's not what it is. A socialist society is not much different than a capitalist society, except that you don't have individuals that make billions of dollars. I mean, you just don't have those, because the people who make that money is the state to be funneled back into the state, right? So when you're selling products, then that money gets funneled back into society. When you're living in a socialist society, we're not talking. It's not like it's a Star Trekian utopia where money no longer exists and people just work and everything's taken over by technology. I mean, that's not what it is. People still get paid. You can still live above the minimum. You can still spend on more. People are going to have more to spend. So you still have that same diversity, except that you and your children and your grandchildren are all going to be taken care of. They're all going to have the correct education. You're not going to have to worry about having the money to send your children to college, right? That's something that people in America still struggle for, right? If we still have first generation college students that their family have never been to college, and they're going to, they're going to the whatever college that they can afford. They're getting whatever education that they can happen to afford, which might not be the best suit for them, or maybe they're not able to travel far away. I mean, in a socialist society, you would go to the school that fits your needs, because the school would be able to evaluate you and your skill set, and then it's going to be paid for. So they want the people that will be the best fit for them. But everyone will get to go to school, and they'll have their schools paid for. In a socialist country, you have an increased number of trade schools. I mean, of course, you'd have, because the government owns the means of production, right? They're going to have people they're going to have to make sure that the people that are coming up, the next generation, are going to be able to work and run the machine. So they're going to have trade schools going to be more available to them. They're going to have more universities available to students. All that is going to be paid for, because they need to have those people trained and ready to take over when the earlier generation, or the two generations before, retire and leave the workforce, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, socialism works. I mean, I get that socialism hasn't worked in, like, I'm describing in an ideal system of socialism, right? And
Sure.
But it hasn't worked like that. But there's numerous examples of socialist programs, socialist philosophy, socialist ideas in certain aspects of countries all over the world that do most certainly work. So socialized healthcare, again, I've mentioned socialized education, all these things. I mean, these are programs that, if they can work in education, if they can work in healthcare, why wouldn't they work in the means of production? So,
wow, that's a good question. We'll have to think about.
But I don't think that socialism could work. Just to grant you a point, okay? I don't think socialism could work in the United States today, right? I don't think if someone came in, say Bernie Sanders came in and pushed a democratic socialist agenda where we gave everyone free schools, we gave free schooling, we gave everyone free healthcare, right?
Military budget would go down.
I mean, we definitely would have to change our military budget. We would, we'll probably have differing opinions of how much should be budgeted for the military. A democratic socialist country a democratic socialist country by nature is not an aggressive country in the world, right? It focuses on building up its population. Their primary focus is their own population, right? So they would go in, they would interact in situations where interacting would benefit their society, but they would not be a police state, right? A socialist country would not be a police state because their primary focus is their own population and building them up. They just wouldn't have the available resources, and they wouldn't have the allotted resources to go and run different. So it'd be a completely different way of running our country, right? And
yeah, it would be.
So I think so we couldn't go true socialist. I think the only saving grace with democratic socialism, by saving grace I mean why it might work in the United States, right, is because we're almost there. We're almost to the point where our technology can alleviate many of the stresses that we deal with every day, right? So if we get the technology that makes diagnosing, say, for instance, diagnosing illnesses automatic or by a machine, where you can just walk into a clinic, the machine will take your temperature, whatever, diagnose what's most likely wrong with you, and then if it's a serious case, send you to the doctor. If it's not, they give you some prescription for some medication and you go on. Like, if you could automate systems like that, then once we can automate systems like that, then it's only one step away from providing it for free as part of a perk, right? And if that's once you can automate, once it becomes cheap, then you don't have to worry about it. When we have food production, when we've gotten food production to the point where we have such a surplus that there's no need for it to cost as much as food does, that food will become free. At least a certain type of food will be able to come free. So we can eliminate poverty. I mean, these are things that I don't see as being a big step away. And I don't know, would you have a problem giving a small percentage of your paycheck away to make sure that no person in the entire country goes hungry? Like, if you said, okay, you have to pay,
I would.
I mean, you would, but would you be justified in that? I mean,
yeah, I'd rather have it go there than Planned Parenthood.
Yeah. So I mean, so if if it was not going to Planned Parenthood, see, I'm not sure how something like Planned Parenthood would work in a socialist country. I mean, a lot of socialist countries would probably, I mean, I don't know, we'd have to talk. But if you're going to have your money spent some way, right, in a socialist country, you're going to have spent to benefit the people that are living right now, and that's just how
right,
just how it has to work. Because if you don't take care of the people that are living right now, they're going to stop working, and then they're not going to pass on the system. So it's necessary that the government takes care of the people that they have now. So I think democratic socialism could work. It would definitely involve, as you called it, taking more away from you and giving it to free to people. Now, I don't think necessarily that would be free in the sense that people wouldn't be working, people wouldn't just be doing nothing and then getting all these benefits. I mean, I think that is maybe a misrepresentation about what the state of things are, right? I don't know that people are simply getting things for free. I'm sure that's certainly a case in some instances, but I don't know that that's a significant population, right? I mean,
no, I'd be happy to give my money to charities that would like help clothe and feed and shelter certain people. But yeah, I mean, to help everybody, because there's a homeless problem, across America, and we need to help the people that are starving. So I'm all for that. Were there any like closing thoughts? Because we're almost
sure. I just think socialist programs definitely work. So we know that, in fact, socialist programs work. They work in the United States. They work all over the world. We know that socialism works in other countries. It may not work in a way that we as Americans think is the ideal way, but it certainly works, right? And it helps China, for instance, be one of the leading countries in the world, right? So just like we can say capitalism works. Why does capitalism work? Well, capitalism works because the United States is a global superpower, right? So obviously that works, but then you have to say if there's another superpower that works under socialism, then it must also work as too. Now, there is definitely, like I said, a mindset that there is a socialist mindset, and if you were truly socialist, like if you were, I don't want to say indoctrinated, but if you accepted the socialist ideal as good, you would not think that giving away you would not think that you would be something would be taken away from you and given to somebody else. It would be simply you are putting your portion into the global or the pot to help whoever needs it, right? Including yourself. So it's not that something's taken from you and given to somebody else. It is you're taking your portion, putting it in, and it's being used the best way that it can be used. So.
Right. There just needs to be a balance between socialism and capitalism, because there's crony capitalism and then there's national socialism. So I mean, there's certain balances, because some of each may work, but too much of either is bad. And I had a really good time doing this debate.
Sure. Yeah, so did I. Sorry, I monopolized it a little bit. I mean, I just think, I think this is important to talk about, because socialism in itself is kind of like a bad word, right? But yeah. I think most people would agree. Now, maybe not, but most people think that a good socialist society, right, would be superior to a bad capitalist society, like you said, run by crony capitalism, if you want to use it that. So, sure. Whereas a bad socialist society, or even a good socialist society, may not be as good as a well-run capitalist society, right? So just because a great running capitalist society may be better than a great running socialist society does not mean that socialism doesn't work. It would be just I guess my closing there.
All right. Sounds good.